Good afternoon. It's Thursday. It's 3:08 and it's time for you to be adrenalized. That's right, folks. It's time to get that blood flowing and get re-energized. Why? Because you're here. You're alive and it's time to be motivated to live your best life. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tom Marino Show. I am your host, Mindset and Success Strategy Coach, Tom Marino. Thank you for tuning in on this Thursday, October the 13th. Alrighty. Well, I am excited. We've been doing a little show swap here at LI News Radio. My guest today also has a show here. It's called You'll Be Fine with Lisa Fine. So Lisa Fine is a lawyer and mediator. I did her show a couple of weeks ago. Lisa is now doing my show. So we're very excited to have her here. So Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hello, Long Island. I'm so happy to be here. It was so much fun when I had you on my show, and I was looking forward to today.
I'm looking forward to today, too. I can't wait to get into some of the nitty-gritty, because you and I do very similar work in a lot of ways.
Don't we?
You know, as a divorce attorney, as a mediator, you're dealing with those major life transitions all the time, right? And that's such a difficult time for a lot of people. And, you know, I have so many clients that seem to find me in the midst of that transition. So I said a while back, I have to connect with more divorce attorneys, more lawyers, and see how we can help each other. So I'm so glad that you're here. I'm glad I got to do your show. I had a blast a few weeks ago. So Lisa, tell us a little bit about your practice. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. So what I do is a little bit of litigation and a little bit of what's known as ADR, or alternative dispute resolution, which is the sort of the opposite of litigation. It's mediation and arbitration. Mm-hmm. So I've done a few arbitrations where I am an arbitrator. I've done litigation cases, many litigation cases, where I represent one side in a divorce or a family issue. Mm-hmm. And my real passion, though, is mediation. Okay. And that is where I am a neutral. I don't represent either party. And let's say it's two people coming in for a divorce. Mm-hmm. They both sit in my room with me, and I am trained. Not everyone is trained, so that's important. I've been trained. So I have a certain amount of tools in my toolbox to help people with their conflicts. So even people who are, you know, not necessarily on the same page about everything, who are scared to come in and do mediation because they're like, well, we don't agree on everything. I have tools in my toolbox to help you constructively listen. Right. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, Tom, but when people are shouting at each other, nobody's listening.
Yeah, no one's listening. It's just a bunch of back and forth, and you're hearing, but you're not listening at all.
Exactly. Yeah. So I help people with active listening, help them really understand where the other person's coming from. We look at what the laws are and what could happen in court, mm-hmm. but that is not necessarily determinative in mediation. We look at necessarily more of what's important to the people participating and their children. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we tailor agreements that are much more creative to their situations. It's my passion. It's why I do the radio show, and I say you'll be fine if you do mediation. Right. Yeah. It's really the best.
It's a great point. You know, you mentioned active listening. I teach a lot of my people active listening skills, because I find, you know, listen, the number one issue in most relationships where stuff starts to go down the drain is the lack of communication. Yes. Right. And we hear, but we don't listen. Right. And I did a show several months ago about the difference between hearing and listening, and how hearing is an involuntary thing. You hear things all the time because we have that sense of sound. But when you're listening, that's voluntary. That is something that you have to actively engage in. And I love that so if people start doing the active listening before they decide to get divorced, before they decide to go to mediation.
Isn't that great?
You're only going to come back to it in mediation if they get there.
And what I say to people is that once they sort of see how it works, and that actively listening to somebody takes less time and energy right. than fighting over them to be heard when they're not going to be heard, they really, you know, can use those skills to stay out of court later after
Right.
the agreements are done, because, sometimes things happen post-judgment, we call it,
Right.
where we didn't have a crystal ball. I don't know, maybe this thing called COVID
Right.
happened that nobody predicted, for example.
Yep.
Nobody could have predicted it. People losing their jobs, people being, at home with each other all the time. So many modifications needed to happen. And,
Right.
and the mediated agreements, well, guess what they did? They came back to mediation to work it out again. It also helps them be better parents.
Right.
They can sit in a graduation ceremony. They can sit in a wedding,
Right.
meet their grandchildren without embarrassing their children
Right.
or each other.
Now, you've done both the traditional divorce and mediation, right?
Yes.
What do you see as the benefits of mediation?
Price.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? That's the truth.
It's certainly not, I wouldn't call it cheap, inexpensive, or free, but it is definitely a fifth or more of the cost of protracted litigation.
Right.
So when people walk into, an attorney's office in Long Island in general, to represent somebody in litigation, the retainer that they have to slap down right there to retain the attorney can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 each.
Yeah.
So you could be spending $10,000 to $20,000, together,
Right.
of family money,
Right.
to hire your attorneys just to get the ball rolling.
Wow. It's costly.
Yeah. And you also don't know the end game. So the final costs can be really dependent on the other person's attorney, how much you fight, the
Right.
judge, how much the judge wants you to be in court. There's a lot of X factors in litigation that control the cost, not the litigants,
Right.
of course. And in mediation, you could put a lot more planning. Sometimes, when times are tough,
Yeah.
people can meet much more farther apart and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely sounds like, because a lot of people's fears to getting divorced is how much it's going to cost. And knowing that there's something like mediation as an alternative, it really provides people that opportunity that may not have thought about it before. So if you're listening to this and you're going through a difficult relationship right now and you're contemplating divorce, we're going to be talking to Lisa the rest of this show, but definitely want you to consider mediation as a way to go, and Lisa's the person to call. You could reach her at lifinelaw.com.
L-Fine Law.
L-Fine, sorry.
That's
What did I say? L-I-Fine?
all right.
L-I
Long Island.
Radio. All right, we're going to be back after these commercial breaks. Check it out, lfinelaw.com.
you.
Talk to you soon. Hey, this is Tom Marino of The Tom Marino Show here. Imagine you wake up and you've had a major sewer backup in your home. Well, let me tell you about a company that I've worked with personally, New House Restoration, where they take your damaged old house and make it a new house. For any water, fire, mold, or asbestos damage, please call them at 631-604-8590. That's 631-604-8590. New House Restoration. Are you tired of nosebleed seats and extra fees? Do you want premium seats at affordable prices? Hey, this is Tom Marino from The Tom Marino Show, and I want to tell you about the best way to get premium tickets at affordable prices for your next concert, sporting event, comedy show, Broadway show, and if you need them anywhere in the United States, just contact Ticket Time. That's TicketTimeUSA.com, TicketTimeUSA.com, and tell them that Tom Marino sent you. And welcome back to the Tom Marino Show. I'm your host, Mindset and Success Strategy Coach Tom Marino. Thank you so much for tuning back in. We are having so much fun here in the studio today talking about divorce mediation with Lisa Fine from the You'll Be Fine show here on LI News Radio. Lisa, when's that on?
It is on Thursdays at 5 p.m.
Oh, in an hour and a half from now. Yeah, we follow each other. That's right. I was on, and we had some fun. And it's really, we were talking right before the break about how doing mediation is definitely a cost savings for people who don't want to get into all of that litigation of divorce. But this is definitely a good way to go. So Lisa, what does a typical mediation process look like? Like, how long does it usually take, as opposed to, because I know some, divorces could take years to do, and some, I've heard some as fast as 2-3 months. So what is the process of mediation, and how long does that usually take people?
So that's typically one of the questions I get during the consultation. So I answer that question all the time. And what I'll tell people is litigation, 2 to 3 months maybe to settle something, but it will take longer to get that judgment of divorce.
Okay.
That's up to the court. But in terms of getting to that point where you have a stipulation of settlement and you put in the papers to get the judgment of divorce signed, litigation or court or the adversarial process on average is 2 years on average. And it is definitely increased because of COVID, because the courts are so behind and skeleton crews and everything like that. Mediation should not really take more than about 6 months, depending. And again, I use that term loosely because it could take more or less depending on people's financial circumstances.
Right.
So I was talking about, how it's a cost saver. There's also that predictability factor.
Gotcha.
They pay as they go for the meetings. They pay, 2 people paying 1 fee to the mediator. They stay for 2 hours. They pay for 2 hours. So sometimes people want to space those meetings further apart.
Right.
Either because of their schedule with work, the children, or because of financial situations where they want to save up the money.
Right.
And then they know at the end of the process to draft a stipulation is going to be a fixed fee. And to draft uncontested papers is going to be a fixed fee. Plus the court gets their money as well, filing fees.
Yes, of course.
They're big.
It's a money-making business as much as the wedding business is a money-making business.
Judges need to be paid.
That's it. Yep. Everybody has to earn a living, right?
Exactly.
What has been, I always tell people that, divorce has this negative meaning. It has this could have a very negative overtone. A lot of people can look at divorce as something that, is supposed to be argumentative. It's supposed to be, drawn out and dragged out, and everybody's supposed to go down fighting. But divorce shouldn't be like that. Divorce should be as amicable as possible.
Especially with kids.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Right?
So important.
So do you handle custody in mediation?
Absolutely.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that.
So, typically I have, sort of my agenda of what I talk about in the mediation process. Usually the first meeting is spent a little bit of getting to know them, background information.
Right.
But when there's kids involved, and as an aside, because I want the mediation clients to understand that nothing is too big or small to mediate. If they have an emergency, I will ask them at the beginning of the session if there's anything urgent.
Right.
If there's nothing urgent, we go into my schedule or agenda. So we'll go through some, background information first. But really, before we get into anything financial or anything else, when there's kids, the first thing I will explain to the participants, that's what they're called, participants, is how custody works. Okay. How it's divided into where the child lives, which is the residential custody aspect of things, and decision-making, the big decisions about a child's life, which is medical, non-emergency medical, religious, educational, the big things in a child's life that, if the parents were intact, in an intact marriage, they would be typically deciding these things together. Right. So that's legal custody. So I explain how that works, what their options are, and then we have a conversation about it, a discussion. And a lot of times when people come to mediation, they do walk in with an idea of having some sort of a shared arrangement, be it a shared legal custody arrangement or even a shared physical or a residential custody arrangement. They're much more amicable to that because they want the mediation process to work. Right. And typically that's their first decision, and I congratulate them. They've just made their first decision. Right.
It's where do they agree, right? I always tell people when there's conflict, find that 10% you agree upon. Well, in these cases, that's a good place. Is that a good place to start?
It is a good place to start because, like I said, typically they're agreeing on stuff, and I try to get that flow going where there's some positive reinforcement, if you will.
Well, that's so
before
important.
We get into the negative stuff like the money, and things like, do you want to introduce your children? Do you want your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse to be able to introduce your children to significant others? That conversation comes later. We try to get some happy stuff, some agreement on holidays and things like that for parenting time.
Making that progress initially is critical.
Right.
Let me ask you this question. I had a client that, was advised by their attorney not to move out of the house during the divorce process because there's 2 kids involved and the whole thing. What is there a specific, when it comes to custody, how does that influence if you're in a marriage that's unhappy and one person decides to move out? Is that seen as abandonment? What is that seen as?
So people come to me and they go, I don't want to abandon the house.
Okay.
You're not abandoning your house. If you're on the deed or if it's marital, that's a classification that will come when we classify the property.
Right.
Title doesn't control in New York, and it doesn't matter who's necessarily living in the house. I would respectfully argue that's not an issue. But when it comes to leaving the house where your children are living, what you are doing in New York by leaving, let's say, mom or dad, whoever, pick one, leaves the house because it's just too much fighting and strife.
Right.
And they go, and I'm not talking they leave for a night, come back. I'm talking they leave, go, living somewhere else.
Right.
They're creating a rebuttable presumption that the parent that remains in the house with the children is the proper residential custodial parent.
Interesting.
Huh? Okay. What that means is basically you're saying to the court,
she's in charge or he's in charge.
I am trusting this other person to be the parent in the trenches with the kids, and therefore it should be assumed that they're the proper custodial parent. And you have to rebut that presumption then. So it makes it harder to get that custody back.
Right.
Once
So it's
you've
hard.
given it up.
Right. And it's hard to get even joint custody at that point.
It just creates a problem. It just creates an
avoidable problem.
Right. So I would see the same thing. Status quo, stay in the house. I've had, unfortunately, situations where a parent left the house and didn't see their kids again after that.
Oh, that's a
shame. For a long time.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
That really tears people apart.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest thing. But so many people stay in a marriage for the kids, right? So many people stay in an unhappy marriage for the kids.
Not necessarily good either for the kids.
But that's not good either for the kids, right? The best thing is to honor what is happening for you. If you've tried to work through it, if you've tried to fix the situation, if you've been going to therapy, if it's not working, it's time to really face the reality of things.
Divorce doesn't have to be negative. It can be a new beginning of a happier existence.
It's so true. And I tell people that all the time. I say divorce for many people is one of the greatest acts of self-love and self-care that you could actually give yourself. It's because there's no point in being in a relationship where it's not making you the best version of yourself.
And the kids will say, I would so rather they just live apart from each other than listen to this fighting all the time. And, it's funny, you're staying together for the kids. The kids aren't benefiting from this environment. No.
It's so true. It's so true. You think you're doing the right thing, but in hindsight, it becomes more destructive. You're not teaching them what a healthy relationship looks like. And you're only setting them up for the same difficulties later on. So
true.
All right, Lisa, we're going to keep talking when we come back after these commercial breaks. But in the meantime, go check out Lfine, Lfine law.com. That's Lisa Fine's website. You could also listen to her at 5 o'clock today here on LI News Radio at the You'll Be Fine show. And if you get a chance, go follow me on Instagram at Tom Marino Coaching. That's Tom Marino Coaching. We'll talk to you right after this. And welcome back to the Tom Marino Show. I'm your host, Mindset and Success Strategy Coach Tom Marino. Thank you for tuning back in on this day, October the 13th. Like I said, it's the middle of October. In addition to being Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but I do want to give a shout out to all the breast cancer survivors out there, my aunt included. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, she was a breast cancer survivor as well back in the 80s. She lived to be 90-something years, 96 years old, 94 years old. And she really, she had a mastectomy in the 80s, and it wasn't an easy journey, but she wound up living another 30 years almost, which really was an amazing thing. But, October is also National Depression and Mental Health Screening Month. And, coming out of a pandemic, we know that anxiety and depression, the rates of those two things has risen significantly. I talked about this in an article earlier this month that, it's over 30% increase in anxiety and depression post-COVID, or as part of this end of the COVID era, hopefully. But it's scary to think about that, mental health is such at the forefront of everybody's situation. We all know someone who is struggling. We all know someone that may be in crisis. And we need to look out for people that may be, displaying different behavior, not acting like themselves, feeling like they're down or that they're sad and things are not the way, they're not happy with the way things are. And if you know someone that's in crisis or struggling, or you yourself, you could also call 988, which is the suicide prevention hotline, and there's people there to help you. So please raise awareness during this month of October. Go to your doctor. There's a screening called the PHQ, a patient health questionnaire that you can take to determine if you're suffering with depression, and get the help. There's a lot of resources out there. BetterHelp.com is another resource out there if you need access to a therapist. There's a lot of places that you can go and look. Before I forget to, I just want to give another shout out to both of my sponsors, Newhouse Restoration, newhouserestoration.com, and TicketTimeUSA.com. That's TicketTimeUSA.com. Both of those people help me to stay on the air, so please support their businesses, Newhouse Restoration and Ticket Time. All right, we've been talking to Lisa Fine this afternoon. Lisa is a lawyer and mediator, and she has a show here on LI News Radio at 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoons called You'll Be Fine. And we've been talking about the benefits of mediation. We've been talking about how Lisa starts off with the positive things in the mediation process, gets the ball rolling, and we talked about custody in the last segment of the show. So Lisa, I wanted to ask you this question. What do most people fight about in their mediation process?
Money.
Money.
Money, money, money.
Money, money, money.
Money, money, money. Either there's not enough of it to go around, or they, one wants to keep as much of it as they can. The other person doesn't deserve it. The support thing. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to get people to understand sometimes, whether it's litigation or mediation, that the support, child support, is for their children, because mm-hmm. they view it as they're giving it to somebody they no longer like, their ex-spouse, but they have a hard time viewing it as giving it for the benefit of their children.
Right.
So we have to kind of guide them to that place where they understand that. But yeah, money is where the fighting typically begins mm-hmm. in mediation as well. And by fighting, I just mean, people get a little more anxious, and you talk about changes in behavior and body language. I can tell, we're coming out of discussing, trick-or-treating with your little kids and, oh, that's so cute. Oh, how fun. And we're going to try to share the day and trick-or-treat together. And then we're going into, paying child support
right.
and dividing up, retirement accounts and selling the house, and then all of a sudden people get a little more huffy puffy.
Well, it's hard. It's a hard thing to discuss, and I find I've had several clients that came to me during the beginning of the divorce process, and one of their biggest things was, how am I going to take care of myself after this process is done, right? Especially people who don't do that function in the relationship, right? In this case, it was one of my female clients who had never really touched the money. And, she didn't know what needed to be done, who needed to be paid, what was the situation with all of that stuff. And we had to go through and really, and my job in that situation is to give confidence to it, right? Is to help people take charge. And by the end of our, 3 months together, she was buying herself a house, and she had figured out all of her money management and all of that. But I think a lot of that arguing probably comes from the person who is the most afraid to be, or doesn't know exactly what to do and how to manage that. And
that's way scarier in litigation, because in litigation, there's always that fear and that almost expectation that the other side, the moneyed spouse, if you will, or the spouse that is responsible for paying the bills and actively mm-hmm. does pay the bills, let's say, there's that fear that they're not being forthright with everything,
Right.
and that everything's not going to be laid bare. And unfortunately, forensics and all that accounting is very expensive. And so, it's a cost-benefit analysis. Do I want to spend all this money to see if there's this money? And then what if there
Right.
isn't, and I've spent all this money for nothing? It's just very difficult to make that decision. So that's something we have to work through. In mediation, the idea is that everybody is coming to the table together. We're all looking at everything at the same time.
Right.
So moneyed spouse or bill payer spouse is right there sitting at the table with non-bill payer spouse,
Right.
Who doesn't have that kind of experience. And we can kind of come up with a plan, whether they can start doing it online or, but yeah, at some point in life, the person who has never paid bills has to learn how to do it,
Right.
because they're going to be on their own. And that's where, I don't know, maybe a life coach would come in.
Yeah, that's kind of where I come
Gee,
in.
I wonder.
Do you know one by chance?
I think I do. And so that's why, I do have to sometimes refer people out to specialists and people who can help them.
Yeah.
Because, I can't be there to help them every month pay their bills. That's not my job. And they don't want me to do that.
Exactly.
For them.
And that is a perfect, thank you for that. That is a perfect segue to why it's so important to have a coach involved during this process, because they're paying you a ton of money and they're asking, you're playing psychologist, you're playing coach, you're playing all these different roles. And it's so important for them to have that additional person who's more neutral, who's really just going to hear their side of the story and just really focus on helping them navigate this.
Especially because if I'm a mediator, I can't really take a side and
Correct.
just help husband, help wife, or help this spouse over this spouse. I just kind of have to say, okay, well, here's some referrals.
Yep.
And it's the same thing with pensions. That is a whole other area. So we have to use experts for that. I don't know how to appraise a house, so we have to
Right.
use an expert for that. So if someone needs to learn how to life coach is where we would send them.
Yeah.
That is definitely the right way to go. I can't do that for them. So
Lisa, I have a quick question, and I have a hypothesis, because I see this all the time in my clients who are struggling in their relationships with their spouse. Do you see that people who are getting divorced typically have their own bank accounts and don't have shared bank accounts? I have a theory. Do you see a mix of hers, mine, and his? His, ours, and mine.
As typical attorney fashion, that's not an easy question to answer in one sentence. Well, it really depends, because I typically see when it's a short-term marriage,
Right.
It's going to be separate bank accounts. But a 30-year marriage, they've merged everything.
Okay, there you go. See, that's a good answer. Thank you for that answer. All right, we're speaking to Lisa Fine of the You'll Be Fine show, which airs here at 5 o'clock on LI News Radio on Thursday afternoon. So definitely tune in to listen to her in a good hour and 10 minutes from now. But we'll be back after these commercial breaks. Go check us out at lfinelaw.com and go check out tommarino.com. And we'll talk to you right after this. And welcome back to the Tom Marino Show. I'm your host, Mindset and Success Strategy Coach Tom Marino. Thank you for tuning back in. We are at the end of our show here, and we've been speaking with Lisa Fine from You'll Be Fine, which airs here Thursday afternoons at 5 p.m. So definitely tune in to listen to Lisa's show. Lisa is a lawyer and a mediator, and we've been talking about all the different things that she experiences in her mediations. When we wrapped up the last segment, we were talking about how I had this theory about people who struggle in relationships often don't have a joint checking account, and it's my money, his money, our money, but there's no our money. And I always tell people, and the reason I brought this up was if you have your own bank account and your spouse has their own bank account, but you don't have a joint bank account, it also says a lot about your relationship and how you see your time with each other, because you need to have your time, her time, and our time. And people sometimes couple all of those things together. Either it's all of it together, right? And there's never that level of independence. And people struggle with maintaining their level of independence in a healthy relationship. When you have a really healthy relationship, You have your time, he or she has her time, and then you have our time together. And if you're balancing that and you're creating that harmony, and then you have the time with your kids and the time for your family, and if you could put all of those things together, you could really keep a very stable relationship. But usually, I'm sure you've seen this. Well, if it wasn't for me, he wouldn't be where he is, right? And you sacrifice that and you build up resentment to that when you're not taking the time for yourself. So that was kind of the theory that I had, is that how people look at their money is how they look at their relationships, and how everything is not always split up evenly and not always organized well together.
And taking it further, it also speaks to communication, because if there's something that somebody wanted to protect, they should have had that conversation, done a prenup, or they could do after the marriage is done if they think of something they want to protect, a postnup.
Right.
But this seems a little more devious.
Yes.
What you're describing. Like I said, I would always, if somebody came to me and said, you know, my spouse is the more moneyed spouse and keeps everything separate from me and gives me $300 a week, I immediately think, is this person the victim of financial abuse?
Right. Right, because that's the thing now.
May not be, but
that is a thing.
It's a flag.
Yeah.
It's a flag for sure. You know, is this person like a kept person, like in the 50s where,
right,
you know, they don't have any independence? And I've seen it so bad where, you know, the spouse that doesn't have the money, doesn't have a car, can't leave the house, is stuck inside with no money and no ability to do anything about it. And that's abusive.
Yeah, it's very controlling. Money is used to control a lot of things. And there's a lot of relationships out there where money is controlling it. And, you know, it's not and that really makes it fearful for that person to leave the relationship.
It could be a red flag, for sure.
Yeah, so if that's you out there, think about it. Think about what you're doing to, you know, to control your own money for yourself if you're in a relationship where you're not getting access to what is yours to have access to.
Right. And they're afraid because they don't know if they can find somebody that will help them equalize that playing field.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, comes up a lot in a lot of my client situations is this confidence around how am I going to take care of myself and all of that. You know, Lisa, I was thinking about this, but, you know, how does inheritance and stuff work, right? So let's say a parent passes away in a relationship and now you're getting divorced. Is that inheritance part of the division of assets? Is that something that is considered, or is it something that stays with the direct relationship person?
So in every divorce, one of the first things we do when we're dealing with what's called equitable distribution, which is how the stuff is divided up, the money, is we classify it. We classify it as separate or marital.
Okay.
Anything that you get during the marriage is presumed to be marital. There's exceptions. That would be an exception.
Okay.
An inheritance would be the recipient's separate property.
Okay. As
long as the inheritance is put into, say it's money, a separate account, or if it's property like a house, a real property, if the deed is titled to the recipient and the recipient's spouse alone, where it gets complicated or muddy is where the deed in the inherited property is put into both spouses' name. Even though one spouse is the actual inheritee, so to speak, you put now the separate property into both parties' names. And now let's say you're using marital money to sustain this what was a separate asset. That's what muddies the waters and creates litigation.
Right. Got it.
And that's the cha-ching type of litigation that costs a lot of money because, you know, it's trying to go back through all these records from years and years and years ago, some of which are not available.
Right.
And the person trying to prove that it's separate properties is typically going to have the burden of proof to sustain that separate property as their own. So yeah, it becomes money there. Same with like a gift.
Right.
So sometimes parents do like estate planning and will gift instead of waiting to inherit, they'll gift it to the child. Same thing. If they gift it to just the one kid, the one spouse, and it's kept separate, and let's say it's money kept in a segregated account in just that spouse's name, then that is pretty easy to segregate and keep.
Right.
But if it's put into a joint account,
right,
guess what? It's fungible money. Well, we left that money in there. We only spent the joint money. No, it's money.
It's
fungible.
there.
So it's as with everything else in the law.
Yeah, there's
never a simple answer.
No, it's never a simple answer. That's what makes this very difficult, and this is why you
fun.
Yeah, and this is why you need experts, and why you have experts like you who are managing that for people and navigating people through that. What would you say you've been doing mediation for how long now?
Say I've been practicing law for 25 years. Doing mediation 15 years, something like that.
At the end of the day,
it's a long time. Wow.
In that time, at the end of the day, do you see people walk away from your table with a better relationship or a worse relationship than when they walked in your door?
In mediation?
Yeah.
Better by far. I mean, I see both. So I go to court or I go to someone's office for like a 4-way where the attorneys and the parties sit down and try to do a settlement agreement.
Right.
And I see the way that the spouses are to each other, with each other, the things they say, the nastiness that transpires across the table. I see the way they are sitting on opposite ends of the courtroom when we're in court, not being able to be near each other.
Right.
And then I see them coming into the mediation room, often driving in together, laughing, not always laughing and happy, but, talking, discussing things, at the end of the meeting, they're discussing, the babysitter for the kids. They're discussing the children. They're having real conversations.
Right. They're talking to each other.
They're talking to each other. They're sitting near each other. They're communicating. Like I said, it's the reason I try to direct people to mediation, especially when there's children, so they can be friendly, not best friends necessarily, but friendly and decent to each other.
Well, what I'm getting from that is that mediation really sets up a great foundation for that co-parenting to really take place, right? So if you are considering a divorce, if you're considering, and you have kids involved in it, and young children especially involved in it, to build that foundation, if you're concerned about building that foundation, mediation definitely sounds like the direction to go, because you're facilitating the beginning of the new relationship that these two people are going to have moving forward.
Also with young children, something to mention is, they're young. You might have to change the schedule down the line. You can come back to mediation for that.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for being here today. This was fun. Now we've had fun. I've been on your show. You've been on my show.
Such a pleasure.
Done a show swap, so to speak. But thanks for being here. Check out Lisa Fine on You'll Be Fine at 5 o'clock here on LI News Radio. And listen, if you are an entrepreneur, solopreneur, business owner, and you're going through a major life transition and you're stuck, you're feeling stagnant, and you're not sure which direction to go, and you're overthinking it and self-sabotaging yourself, then that's a reason for you to reach out to me. Go to tommarino.com, fill out a contact form, or just text me at 516-588-0750. That's 516-588-0750. Text or call, and let's get you scheduled for a complimentary session. All right, until next time, this is Tom Marino saying choose your adrenalized life.
Well, I should probably